this video we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts requirements for building the Printtable S series. So obviously there's various M3, M4 and a few M5 bolts that we need, and then there's an amount of self-tapping screws. I'm not going to go into great detail onto the self-tapping screws themselves, other than to turn around and say you're probably best off buying a kit like this, and that will give you obviously a selection of self-tapping screws. As I zoom in on there, so you can see what's in that pack, and obviously give some idea of the sizes in there. Okay, the self-tapping screws are used on items like mounting the Z motor and the Z rod holders onto the Printtable frame itself, but then they're also used onto the legs. Obviously, self-tapping screws are screwed into wood, essentially, or hardboard. So self-tapping screws are a good choice for that. So things like the Z motor housing, the feet that go on the bottom, but also we use some self-tapping screws just on holding fans into place. So where we're putting fans onto the underneath of the print head, we'll just use a couple of self-tapping screws on there. Self-tapping screws to hold the actual board itself into place, and also the MOSFET element, but we also use self-tapping screws for things like the BL Touch. I'll just zoom in on that there so you can just see the size of that's going into there. So predominantly that's what we're using the self-tapping screws for. They're the important part of the M3. Now M3, M4, M5, these nuts and bolt selections, there's only small quantities that we need. But when it comes to buying these sort of bolts, it's always best, or can work out cheaper, to buy them in quantities of like 25 or even 50. So just bear that in mind when you're looking at purchasing these. And there is quite a varied size that we need, and this really is just to make the most of the Printtable and make sure that the thread requirements are just the right requirements really for the job in hand. So M3 grub screws, we're going to need 12 of those. The M3 grub screws, they will go into your Z rods holders, but also so 8 of them will go into there, and 2 each side then to hold your rod into place on your X axis. 3 14mm, we'll need 8 of those. So M3 14mm, those are the things that go onto the supports themselves to hold the rods into place there. So you can see those there, you'll need at least 8 of those. Then we go on to the M3 16mm, you'll need 11 of those. And when I'm talking about thread, I'm talking about the thread size. When I'm saying 16mm, 14mm, that's the length of the thread, not the head itself. So discount the head, only measure the length of the thread. So M3 16mm, 11 of those. Those are used on things like the belt tensioners. So that's where that is coming through on there. As we go through the build, I'll tell you exactly what bolts and to use at what place anyway. M3 18mm, you need 6 of those. Now these are a recent add-on. This is to go with the new X axis. And what that bolt is going to do, it's so we can loop the belt round, and then it essentially will slide it in, and we can put the bolt through, and that will make the belt then totally removable just by removing the bolt and sliding that through. So we need 2 for each side, so that's 4 of those, but also when we're mounting it onto the print head, we need 2 for in there as well. Okay, M3 25mm, you need 3 of those. M3 30mm, you'll need 7 of those. M3 34mm, you'll need 8 of those. And M3 10mm, 4 of those, but you only need them 4 bolts if you're going to be using the Y motor housing. So we are going to be doing a build with this, and this is essentially just to mount the motor into position on there. Just grab a motor, slot that in, and that's just to show you that's only the 10mm are only required to mount that motor into position. Alternatively, if you're not going to be using that, we'll be going with this method, which is attaching a motor either side, and for that, obviously, as already mentioned in the requirements, that's going to M3 34mm, sorry. So if you're mounting the motor directly onto that, you'll need 4 for each side. Alternatively, you could actually get a dual shaft motor, still print off one of the bearing houses, put that on the opposite side, and then run the shaft all the way through and then onto that. So it still is possible to run it with one motor just bolted to the support. That's a configuration I haven't tried yet, but there's no reason why that would not work. Okay, then we move on to the actual M4 requirements. Sorry, whilst on the M3 requirements, don't forget you're going to want some M3 washers and some nuts for these. You need at least 6 of the nuts to do the belt tensioners. Then you need another 4 to do the print head itself. The same again, obviously as I'm going through the build of all these components, I'll tell you where you'll be using what. So, you know, if you was to purchase about 20 M3 nuts and about 20 M3 washers as a minimum requirement, that will do you to be able to build the print table. Then we move on to the M4 requirements. You need 14 of 20 millimeters. So M4 20 millimeters, you'll need at least 14 of them, and then M4 30 millimeters, you'll need at least 2 of those. Again, some nuts and washers. You need at least 4 nuts for the M4s, so at least 4 M4 nuts, and a couple of washers as well. Wouldn't go amiss. I would probably suggest getting a little washer selection. It may be cheaper. M5, on the M5 we only need 60mm countersunk, which is that type of screw there, and that's to hold the bed into place. And whilst I'm on the bed, you may want to purchase some nuts as well for that, but we'll need 3 springs as well, sorry, about 18mm in length, just to help put the bed into position. So 3 18mm springs, 3 M5 countersunk 60mm bolts to fasten the bed down. I've talked about in the other videos before about the cam lots. You'll need 8 of the cam lots and 8 of the cam dowels. That's to fasten that down. The dimensions and the requirements for that are already listed in that video. Now in the description underneath on this video, I will list out all these requirements again, so you've actually got a printed version, saves you having to go to a building materials or anything like that to be able to see those. So every one of the nuts and bolts that I've listed in this video will also be there in the description. And again, it's just there to assist people in purchasing the right length nuts and bolts. As we use those nuts and bolts going through the build, I will tell you what selection to pick up as we're building the items. Hope that's been of some assistance to you, and in the next videos we're going to start obviously building the actual print table up. We've done some preparatory work to date. Just got one more video just to put on before we start assembling everything together, and that's some people have requested that we just see a list of all the printed parts requirements. Hope this video has been of some assistance to you, and I hope you have fun building your own print table. Thank you.